This is A Conversation With, brought to you by the Conference Board's Human Capital Center.
Welcome. I'm Amy Abel. I'm Vice President of Human Capital here at the Conference Board, and I'm delighted to welcome you today to our podcast, A Conversation With. And today's podcast features our guest, Nabeel Ahmad, who is Distinguished Principal Research Fellow with us at the Conference Board and works a lot on different research topics with myself. So I am very delighted to invite him to join me today. Today's podcast is about the intersection of business, technology, and learning. Those are three very big topics that have been evolving and changing very dramatically in our lives and in our world and in our workplace. Right? What's business doing? The technology that is infiltrating all aspects of our lives, and how we learn as individuals, how we learn in the workplace, and what do we do to make sense of all of these changes in our lives so that we can continue to prepare ourselves for the new world of work. So that's our focus for today. I think it's a very rich and complex topic, so I'm delighted to have Nabeel join me for this conversation. So thank you, Nabeel.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for listening. I hope the next 25 minutes will be of great value to you. So thank you.
I think it's a complex conversation that we hope will have our listeners ponder. So great. So first, let's start off with a little bit of your background. Help me understand and share with me your experiences of your career and how you are basically focusing your career on this intersection between business, technology, and learning. It's a terrific place to be, and I just want a little brief intro into how you
Sure.
you arrived here.
Well, I try to tell myself that every day. It's a terrific place to be. So good. Thanks for that external support there. But actually, I have a formal background in all three. I did my undergraduate in business, and I have a technology background, did my master's in computer science, and done a lot of things around just creating my own sort of small technology products. If we can save the should everyone learn how to code conversation for another day, I have some opinions on that. But then also, as I started to go through, I realized that throughout my career that a lot of people have, let's say, a business background, and then maybe they combine it with technology. But what could be something that's an interesting combination in addition to that? Now, my father is a cardiologist, so I was like, I didn't really like hospitals. I don't like medicine too much, so that's probably not a good path to go. My mom says I like to argue a lot, so I don't know that I'd want to formally be a lawyer. So I said, you know what, maybe we should go and look at the education side, because that's something that has always appealed to me. And that's really how I went down that path. And that's how, Amy, you and I met maybe 10 or so years ago in a research group while you were completing your doctoral studies at NYU and I was at Columbia Teachers College. And so since then, I've really found that in the workplace, as I'm sure you and many of the listeners have noticed, is that there are, or if you are in, like, let's say, an HR learning conversation, undoubtedly at some point in time, technology and or business will come up. And so that's why I thought it was really interesting to focus on that intersection, because whether we like it or not, or whether we know it or not, more than often it happens in our everyday conversations.
It's a great journey. I always appreciate listening to people's journeys. And so I thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And how intriguing. Also, it's a great time to be at this intersection. Right? There are so many things going on. And maybe that's a good way to segment into our conversation next, which is, okay, so we're in this new world of work. It's chaos, it's turbulent, it's disruptive, all of those, big adjective words. Right. So how does each of these elements fit into that disruption? The business, the technology, the learning. How do they all collide or intersect, or how do you view that?
Sure. And before we go into that, one of the a thing I like about the Conference Board and the work that the Conference Board does is it's sort of rooted in what I would call and many call like a scholar practitioner approach. So you don't have just pure academics going through, you don't have pure practitioners, but you have this mix of them. I know, Amy, both you and I have that background, whether it's through teaching, publications, research, et cetera. And the reason why I mention that is as a pretext to what we're about to talk about is that is, I believe, very good grounding of having a good perspective on how you can look at things. And so maybe going into more detail around the business, the technology, and the learning. So first, the business side. I think it's important, regardless of what position you are in an organization, to understand the nature of the business that you're in. Now, what I'm not saying is that you need to be an MBA or you need to have some finance background, but let's say, and I think this happens a lot. I've experienced it in the different organizations that I've been involved with in the past is that you have people, let's say in HR or learning, and they say, you know what, I'm just a back office person. I'm just here to do my job. I can do this anywhere, which to a certain extent is true. At the same time, what I think is important is you can make an argument that, well, can you learn a little bit more about the industry that your business is in, how they make money, and how the people who you are serving, your clients, which oftentimes is internally if you're a back office function, what do they need to be able to be successful in their job? So I think having that focus on the business, just to understand at a high level, here's what our other people in this organization do, here's the industry that we operate in, and here's how the business stays afloat, and here's how we make money, and here's how essentially I get paid. I think that is an important thing. And I think over the past couple of years, where we've seen, especially a lot of the research coming out of the conference board, has shown that HR or learning, they can't really hide behind in the back office anymore and just be a pure cost center. Now, it's not that they're expected to be a profit center, but it's really to say, okay, the business sees there's value here, and let's bring you to the table. But in order to bring you to the table, there has to be some expectation that you understand what we're trying to do on the business aspect. So that's where I think, first off, that having a grounding, again, you don't have to have a business degree, you don't have to be an MBA, but just have an interest in understanding and an opening to say, let me understand more of what the nature of the work of the organization that I'm doing is.
And if I can jump in, it sounds like you're summarizing what we've known for a long time, but want to reemphasize is becoming more strategic, because businesses are realizing that the employees and the talent they have are absolutely critical to executing their business strategy. But we have a challenge in the business side, which is the employees may not actually have the skills, the mindsets, or the attitudes that we actually need to execute those strategies. And this is where the learning comes in, right? So learning has become even more critical in today's intersection of business technology and learning. But we need to step up into that, right? We need to step up into that to combine those elements in our own way to figure out how we can be more strategic versus more tactical or thinking about the next program.
Right, exactly. And so as a good segue there, you were talking about the learning aspect. And so a lot of times you'll see a lot of numbers. I was doing some research earlier, the Institute for the Future, they had some interesting number that I think somewhat questionable. 65 to 85% or so of jobs in 2030 will not exist today. I think it's a little bit less, but I think the point is clear, is that there are a lot of things that we don't know what's going to happen. Even 10 years ago from today, there wasn't a role as an app developer or anything to do with most of what we do on our smartphones. A lot of those jobs didn't necessarily exist. And so I think that there is an important point there around this aspect of learning. And the key part is really to be able to develop the right skills, to be able to make yourself as future ready as possible. And so, because a lot of times, and we'll talk about the next aspect here in a bit around the technology pieces, people are very timid about technology, thinking it's going to replace them. But if we have apply a certain perspective of that and see that technology can actually help us do things that it's better at that we may not want to do, so that frees us up to do other types of work. The last thing I'd say about the learning aspect is that I know there was I think earlier this year, a conference board, a research article that came out. It was a survey among CEOs, and the top internal concern of CEOs is, as you mentioned, talent. Right, it's this war for talent. And part of the reason why is that the types of talent that CEOs or top high-performing organizations look for, not only are they looking for people with certain skills, but more importantly, I believe, is the right mindset to be able to develop. And just as a quick aside, is whenever I was completing my doctorate, which was about the same time as you, people were asking me, "Oh, well, what'd you really learn from there?" And it sounds ridiculous, but what I told them, I said, I learned how to think. And they would look at me kind of sideways, like, to think. They're sort of like implying that I didn't know how to think before, which
or you learned how to learn.
Exactly, right. And so, and that learning how to learn or learning how to think is really what I think drives this business technology learning side, is that taking something that people traditionally look at one way and say, you know what, can we look at it differently? Can we apply things? Can we turn the screws a little bit differently in a different configuration? And what happens if we do that? And that's where I think that learning how to think and learning how to learn is a critical aspect there.
No, I think that's great. And I hope our listeners can understand, listening to our passions and our background, learning is the true foundation of any of this, right? Any of the survival of business, productivity of people, execution of strategy, the foundation of it, we could argue, is in the learning.
Right.
And so that's where I think we need to dig deeper and figure out for ourselves and for our companies, what does that mean, right? If learning is the focus, how do we help that? So let's turn a little bit into digging deeper around the technology.
Sure.
I know that you obviously spend a lot of time in this space and you're studying trends around technology and how technology impacts how we learn. Can you share a little bit about some of the trends you've been thinking of recently?
Sure. And so maybe just to step back for a second on the technology side too, is that there's a lot of times people talk about like digital transformation, which is a big thing. And essentially what I interpret that to mean is that there's new technologies coming out there. Which are the ones should we focus on? Which ones should we not focus on? And how can these help to solve our business problems? And that's the way that I view it. And again, as someone with a technology background, I've done a lot of programming, coding, and that's probably part of the reason for my gray hair and things like that, and my poor demeanor or whatnot, is that, I'm kidding, of course, is that there are, especially when it comes to learning, the way I view technology is it's an enabler. Oftentimes, it's not the solution. It's because technology itself is created by someone for something, and the solution itself of technology isn't necessarily going to help you get across the finish line. But if you can apply it in a novel way to a business or learning problem that you do have, then that becomes interesting. Now, getting into the details is that probably and arguably the most popular technology trend that has been happening over the past year or two has been AI, or artificial intelligence. And quite simply, I'll attempt to explain as simply as I know how some of the differences between different flavors of AI, artificial intelligence. So in general, AI, the way I view it, is something that mimics human behavior. There was this old test by the father of computer science. His name is Alan Turing. I don't know if do you remember this? There was a movie that came out 5 or 6 years ago called The Imitation Game. Do you remember this? It was Benedict Cumberbatch, I believe.
Uh-huh.
It was about breaking the Enigma, German Enigma code in the World War.
Oh,
and
yes.
It was about this. So the main actor played this guy, Alan Turing. And he's known as the father of computer science. So without going into the details on that, the reason why I mentioned that is he had something 56 years ago that he called the Turing Test. And the Turing Test is the basis of artificial intelligence. It says, can a computer mimic human behavior? So if you are behind a screen and you're interacting with someone, can you tell whether it's a human or not? And if you can't, then that gets on to artificial intelligence. So that's something at the very, very basic level. Now, as a quick aside, there is a lot of types of technologies today that are around automation. So think of like a macro in an Excel spreadsheet. That's not necessarily artificial intelligence. That's more automation. So just repeating rules-based tasks more and more. And so I just wanted to clarify that while that is helpful and it is nice to have, not necessarily artificial intelligence. So the three main components of AI, I would view them in concentric circles. Like artificial intelligence is the outer circle. The middle circle, which a lot of people will talk about, is machine learning. And then the inner circle, which is a subset of AI and machine learning, is called deep learning. So what is machine learning? This is so essentially what it is it's the ability for a computer program to learn without being programmed. So an example is, let me show you an image. Can you tell me if there's a cat in it? So how does a computer do that? Essentially what it does is there's a couple of steps. One is we have to feed it hundreds of thousands of images of cats and say, okay, here are different types of cats. But we as humans, we have to say, what defines a cat? So, okay, it has a couple eyes, it's hairy, it has 4 legs, it has whiskers. So you define what it is and you help to train that machine. And that's what's called machine learning. So to where eventually it will be able to learn on its own and distinguish if it's a cat or not. So that's I would say the basis of machine learning. And it's really like a linear correlation. So if I see these things, then I can correlate that to being a cat. So you'll see that a lot, image recognition, voice recognition, things like that. And we'll talk about how that relates to learning as well. And then the other one, which is really interesting, is this idea of deep learning. So if you think about showing a computer a scan of an MRI and you ask it, does this patient have cancer? That's a very complex question just by looking at an image. So deep learning is associated with more of a nonlinear correlation where that's more like true complex thoughts of like human behavior. So there's multiple factors that a doctor has to go to just by looking at an MRI to determine whether they think a patient may have cancer or not. And so that's where the aspect of deep learning comes into. So again, I just wanted to just spend a couple minutes just to talk about some of those classifications, and those are sort of the big ones. And what we start to see now in the learning and the HR space is that we're starting to use these technologies for an organization level for the benefit of not only the organization but individuals.
And so how is that playing out? How do you, or where do you see examples of how that's playing out and what organizations are thinking about? And that's a nice setup for the definition of AI. So thanks very much for that. But yeah, so let's dig deeper into that learning space. What are you seeing? Sure.
So one of the big areas, and it's become popular over the past couple of years, is like a learning experience platform. So if you think about like a traditional LMS, a learning management system, which is basically a place that houses different types of learning courses or whatnot, and then it's also done for compliance, right? So this person completed this, and we have records of it to show that these people did that. But what happens is that people want more than that. And they want to be able to learn from different sources. So if we think about, we were talking about this earlier, is let's say you want to search for a movie. And right now, like I don't have cable TV, so I just have a bunch of apps. So I have Netflix, I have Amazon Prime, I have, whatever else, pretty soon Disney Plus, because my kids can have it. But if I want to find something, this actually happened the other day. So my son came on and we had this Disney app, and he said, I want to watch Mickey Mouse. But they took it off because Disney took it off because they're going to put it on their platform. So the point being is that all of these content areas are in different silos. And so the underlying basis of like a learning experience platform is to be able to easily discover content outside of one silo. So we would call them like trusted sources. So think like Coursera courses or TED Talks or things in edX or like a Harvard Business Review article. If you could just search all those in one place, that's the idea of what a learning experience platform can do for you. So it's personalized, the content is curated, but it also has social aspects where you can, through machine learning or deep learning, you can get recommendations, just like on Netflix or Amazon, where it says this person, you watch this, you may also like this because other people watched it or because we think you like it for a variety of reasons. So that's where you start to see those types of consumer technologies and consumer applications that start to transfer into the workplace and into learning. And the last point is that, and the reason why this is a big thing is because people expect this nowadays. And I think it's a good thing because the bar has been raised so much on the consumer side, and it's difficult for organizations to keep up. But in order to attract that talent and to retain that talent, this is what's expected. So.
I think you're absolutely right on that. It's such a big disconnect at this point where what consumers and individuals experience in their own homes, in their own non-work life, and how they expect things to respond. It would be amazing if I had a full Netflix application that searched the world on whatever topic I want to learn and recognizes perhaps even the types of formats that I like to use or the types of specific content, sub-content topics that I would like around a particular topic. And I think you and I know that the world will get there, but we're not quite there yet. Right. But it definitely is a challenge for many of our organizations, right? And many of us still have many traditional learning management systems. Right. And while many companies that I talk to are experimenting and are expanding, so this is all great, we're heading in the right direction, but it's going to be a huge challenge. Yes. And it's not even just the money to implement new technology, it's the mindset around how to make this work and how to make it work in the way that our talent and employees want it to work. Right. And it may not be the same per company. It may be different for various reasons. And so being very intentional and very thoughtful about each and every step and what we roll out and what we implement and how we offer services and products and learning, it's a fantastic thinking, right? I just love that thought and what the possibilities are, but it's also going to be a lot of hard work.
It is a lot of hard work. And I think you hit it on the head there, is that it's not really about the technology, as we were talking about earlier. It's about this mindset and being able to institute a culture and a sense of purpose that allows people to be able to feel that they can invest their workday in developing themselves. Because as I'm sure you've seen it as well, I've seen it firsthand in many organizations, people oftentimes feel like they can't go and develop themselves and spend time on themselves at work because they feel that the organization wants them to be focusing on something else. So I think that is a big area to focus on. And just taking it one step further, is that there's a couple different flavors of these different types of machine learning or these systems. One is like skills based. So if you have like a learning path, or if you're trying to get to the next step in your career, what are the skills that you need to learn, and you can learn through that way. So it's very skills based. So IBM does things like that with their internal learning platform. A couple other big organizations too. Another one is more usage based. So that you would like LinkedIn Learning, for example. So they say, okay, here are the popular, based on your profile, here are the popular types of learning that people take. So it tends to be on where they've seen a lot of usage. Again, not exclusively, but that you see skills-based, you see usage-based, but then you also see ones that are just pure AI-based, so artificial intelligence. So for instance, like there's, I forget the name of the organization, but there's a few of them doing this with like training manuals in finance, where a computer just goes through and reads through them, and a computer determines and suggests to a human, here's what we think that people should learn about out of this 100-page manual. And so let's focus on that. I'm thinking, okay, if that works well, I wish I had this when I was doing that type of compliance work.
A cheat sheet for tests, perhaps?
I guess so. And then the last one is, and you see this a lot, like if you use something like Twitter or Pinterest, where if you remember when you set up your profile initially, it'll say, okay, what topics are you interested in? What do you like to do? And based off of your input, we will suggest people or accounts or boards for you to follow. So you also get those where you're having a interface with the learner, and you're helping the learner to curate for themselves. So it's like a win-win situation there. So lots of different applications of technology. But again, the important part is understanding from the business and the learning perspective is, what are we really trying to do? And how can we help to push that forward? And technology will just help us to enable that to happen.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. What about, let's cover one more technology trend, like chatbots. What's going on there and in that space for learning and businesses, et cetera?
Right. So oftentimes, like if you go on the internet today, you'll see a lot of these chatbots pop up. And I used to work like in high school and college. My part-time jobs when I was working were always at these call centers. I worked in TV. I did DirecTV once. I did Gateway Computers. I'm aging myself here. Like the computers with the cows on the outside. I was doing support there. Then I did one for AT&T Wireless, which was singular at the time. Again, really aging myself here, but nonetheless, hopefully some of our learners can relate to that. But the point being is that a lot of the questions that came in are repetitive questions. And it's not that they're bad questions, because people need to know these, but can they be answered in a more efficient way? And that's where you start to see things around like chatbots, where not just for consumer sites, but switching over to the learning side, is that there are predictable types of questions, frequently asked questions that someone can ask a chatbot through that learns that these are important through artificial intelligence because it's trained with that data, and they can get answers quicker than waiting or calling someone to get that. So you start to see that you're starting to see a lot of this for almost like level 0 or level 1 support, like that first line of defense. Say, I just want to know, where can I see the credits that I have for this course that I took? How many more do I need to do to get it by the end of the year? So a lot of fact-based type of questions tend to be good because that's what machines are good at: repetitive, predictive, fact-based things. And if you really need to talk to someone, you can. And let's save those more complex human interaction questions for that. So that's where you start to see things around like chatbots, and that helps the employee experience because you start to look again at whether it's a fair comparison or not. We are all consumers outside of work, and we're used to things the way that technology is moving. And we're starting to be used to these things externally. So how can we mimic those internally? So those are a lot of opportunities there, and there are going to be increasing opportunities as these chatbots, as example, gets more sophisticated, and they can help to guide learners. IBM's another good example. I think they have one for coaching, where they do something where it says, okay, what are the types of topics that you may need coaching on, and helping to guide someone through that in a more accurate and streamlined way than perhaps a human could do at scale.
Absolutely. And I think, the example you have with the chatbot around answering simple questions, I mean, that's great and that's super helpful. But, your scenario that you just mentioned, I think it becomes so much more interesting where you have a bot recommending, guiding, directing, right, suggesting, and really sort of pushing your career in some way, right? And I mean, career not in like the broadest sense, but maybe even just your next step within an organization, and what might that look like, and and the fact that you're almost having this quote unquote conversation with a bot to figure this out in your own mind is, really engaging. It's definitely different than what we would have had in the past, right? And so those, I think, possibilities will continue to develop, as you mentioned. As all of these technologies continue to evolve, it'll just get more and more sophisticated.
And oftentimes, as you said, like what happened in the past was essentially nothing. Is you would have these questions and there was no one to answer it, so you would never get answers. And so it's not like there was a different way or a more streamlined way before. Oftentimes, the alternate was nothing, and that's more today. It's unacceptable, right?
Yep.
Because now we have technologies that, if we apply them in the correct manner, we can do it at scale, and it is actually beneficial to everyone.
Absolutely. All right. Well, why don't we cover our last topic that I wanted to discuss with you today, which is around our listeners and how they can think about their own learning. We talked a lot about this intersection between business, technology, and learning, and all the chaos and changes going on in this new world of work. What can we as individuals do to sort of prepare ourselves? How should we even think about our own learning? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and the way I would answer it, it reminds me of a story I once heard from the head of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, where he was asked, what's going to change in the future? And he said he gets asked that question a lot, and his answer is, what's not going to change? So from the Amazon perspective, they know two things to be true throughout the course of time, is that people like variety. So they want a lot of products. So that's why they have big fulfillment centers throughout the U.S., multiple products just everywhere. And the other thing they know is that people want their products fast. So they don't want to wait a week for it to be shipped. And that's why you've seen over the past years, they've been really increasing their infrastructure and logistics to be able to do next day shipping, or even some parts of the country, same day or same hour shipping there. And so for the learning side, it's okay, well, what do we know is not going to change? So we know that there's always going to be new technologies. Thinking as someone with a technology background, about 3-4 years ago, it's like, okay, I can't keep up anymore. It's just like, it's going too fast for me. But the things that we know that won't change when it's in regard to the business, the technology, and learning at this intersection is interacting with people. You're always going to need to interact with people. You're always going to need to have good soft skills, so to speak, communication, interpersonal skills, communication, negotiation, things like that. And so those, I think, are important to start out to say, we know that these things are not going to change. And to be able to have that is an important thing. Now, what should we perhaps do differently is, one is And I think this is really the topic of this conversation, is viewing things with a different lens. So what we're trying to do today is to say there is this interesting intersection happening with business, technology, and learning. And in the conversations that you have internally with your groups at your organizations, do you have people that are representing those different aspects? Or what levels of people are the people who are doing the work? Are they part of these conversations? Can you have them talk and give some insight? I think those are ways that we can view things a little bit differently, because it'll give us an alternate perspective that may give us once in a while an aha moment. And that moment will spark something that could lead us down to something very interesting. So I think those are some opportunities of things that we can do a little bit differently. And then the skills, what are the types of skills that we should focus on? I mean, there's a variety of them, but really, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's what are the things that we know when we're looking at technology and artificial intelligence. Robots aren't going to take over our lives. It's that my personal opinion is that we want them to take over the things that we don't like doing, or the things that they are better at that frees us up to do things that are more suited for humans. So things that are repetitive, rules-based, that it can do at scale. Robots are really good for that. Complex decisions around like communication, negotiation. I think those are the types of skills that we can and should be focusing on. And again, as Amy, as you mentioned earlier, it's just learning how to learn, learning how to think, and to be open to challenging your own assumptions, regardless of what role you're in, what age, or what geography you're in. Having that learning mindset, I feel, is really the most important key to be able to manage anything that comes at us in this new world of work.
Yeah, maybe that's, I definitely appreciate that view of learning how to learn and how to do it continuously and in different ways, right? So we will all learn in different ways with different content, different topics. It just depends on, where we are in our lives and our work and careers. And to broaden our view and proactively say, well, what should we learn today, or what should we learn this year or next month? What is that? How does that help us? And unfortunately, I think in many of our organizations, we find that as a challenge, where we don't have employees in our organizations that have that mindset,
right,
where I don't know if they're too comfortable, or they're perhaps a little timid, or maybe even outright fearful, right, of things like AI and
sure,
robots coming in to take our jobs. And how we, as learning professionals, HR and talent professionals, help not only ourselves, but help our organizations and our employees and our groups and teams figure out how to adjust to that, adapt to that. And I think you're right on about the types of skills. Robots and AI will continue to grow in use and in demand, and they are very good at doing some things, much better at it in many things than we are as human beings. But there are things, the funny thing, it was making me think, technology is teaching us to be more human.
Right, exactly.
Right?
The irony of that.
The irony of it is that we actually will become stronger and better if we actually become more human,
right,
and figure out the human skills that we will excel at and apply that in a very constructive, productive way. And like you said, leave the technology to all the, menial, tedious, rote type of tasks that we didn't want it to do anyways.
Yes.
And how do we take that on, right? So But it's really different to think about that from an entire organization's perspective. It's hard. It's not so simple, and there are lots of infrastructures in place. I was just talking to a group of talent management executives, and we were talking about the new world of work and how things will change, and we were also sort of thinking through that, but also challenged with, oh my goodness, all the technology systems that we have in place, all the policies that we have in place, all the procedures that we have in place, all the ways of doing work that we have in place, fundamentally will need to shift. And that's daunting. That's, can be very daunting. But I hope at least from today's conversation, we've given some perspectives to our listeners where it doesn't have to be as daunting. one step at a time. But a great way to think about it is this intersection between business, technology, and learning. And how do we see ourselves in it? Right. Just like when you started this podcast with how did you evolve into your journey, into this intersection, every one of us will have this intersection of business, technology, and learning. And the question is, how do we see ourselves on this journey? Or what is our journey? Maybe we should define our journey from today moving forward, right? Different ways to look at that and figure out how we want to fit into that. So I'm very jazzed by that thought, actually. I really like the way that frame works, even for myself.
I like it. I am on that train.
You're on the train. No, it's great. And I mean, I think we're good on time in terms of our podcast. And I really wanted to thank our listeners for listening in and thinking through these issues with us, because these are very complex issues, and they will dominate our lives for the rest of our lives, basically. Yes. And they will be very present, and how do we work within that is what we need to ponder. So I hope our listeners will take that and think about it more on their train, plane, car rides home. And I really wanted to thank you, Nabeel, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Amy. I appreciate it.
Really, thank you for stimulating the conversation. And for our listeners, another sort of call to action is do visit our website, conferenceboard.org, for other podcasts that we have in this series of conversation with, but also other podcasts that we offer that you can, again, listen to on your plane, train, and car rides home, where we hope to provoke more thinking, especially where it revolves around ourselves, our lives, people, HR, and our organizations that we function and live within every day. So thank you very much again for your time. This is Amy Abel with the Conference Board.
This has been A Conversation With, brought to you by the Conference Board's Human Capital Center.